Hi and good morning. Uh, it's a while. I know that we have come together after the last scheduled meeting. We were not able to get together. But in this section, I am looking forward to complete or look at the various aspect of thinking, and then from there move forward to looking at in the next video about writing and after an exercise that you would be finishing. We are looking forward to close the entire this research methodology and writing uh, course by the end of next week latest. So hoping you will continue to learn and study. And today's session we are going to look at thinking. We'll continue to look from the last what we were talking about on thinking. We will continue to look at that today. So as we move into this section, let us begin with a word of prayer. Father, you are good and you are merciful and kind. You have allowed us this time, and even as God, we are separated by time and space. But Lord, you are God above and beyond. We pray that you will sharpen our intellect and our thinking, that we will be able to think on thinking this morning, O God, that you will help us and give us, Lord, that grace that we need, O God, to learn well and to speed up. Into your hands we commit. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, in our last meeting, we were talking about think, what it means to be thinking. I mean, that happens to be the we have covered the topic on self, and then we looked into the knowing part of it, how self is important in the whole knowing, and how knowing. There are different kinds of knowing, and we emphasized on a knowing that is more experiential and pedagogical in its nature. And now we had come to the part of thinking. What it means to think is what we were talking, and so we will continue to look into it. Just a quick recap on what we did last time, and so we started on with this. What do you think about I was born intelligent, but education ruined me? And many of you had good thoughts on that. Uh, we will continue to move forward. You remember there is a shallow looking at it and a deep looking at it. We said in the shallow manner of it, it looks like education ruins, but which is a philosophy in itself. And then we looked at this whole aspect and said, well, it is more than that. It talks about intelligence and not necessarily on education and ruining. It probably talks about a certain kind of education that has the capacity to limit the thinking of the people. And so we started on that note. I'm sure you will remember that. And then when we went on to look into what exactly is thinking. And so answering that question, we got into talking about thinking is a process, and it is not just a process, it is a representative process. As C.T. Morgan would put it, it's a sequence of symbolic processes. So it is a representative process which includes, which has the following aspects in it: organizing, analyzing, patternizing, imagining, reorganizing, and creating. And we talked about, um, you know, uh, about the various aspect of the various people what they talk about thinking. We spoke about Mun regarding one of the thinkers talk about thinking as a sequential arousal of symbols. Woodworth, on the other hand, talks about thinking as mental exploration of the data to deal with the environment effectively. And in the psychological discussions, it is thinking is ideational activity deliberately controlled by a purpose. So it is different from daydreaming. Thinking is not daydreaming. Thinking is a purposeful activity. Purposive thinking in mental exploration to find a new truth, or probably to rearrange, to rethink on the truth that you already know about. So that is what we talked about. What is thinking? We also said thinking skills are mental process. We used to do things like solve problems, make decisions, ask questions, construct plans, evaluate ideas, organize information, and create objects. These are all part of thinking. Thinking is core. Thinking is at the core of all this activity, all the cognitive activity. It is a mental process. It involves for us to use both our brain and our mind. Remember the brain-mind relationship we talked about earlier in the section when we were talking about self. Thinking refers to the process of creating a logical series of connective facets between items of information. It is not, in that sense, just we think about. It's not. It's a process where we are trying to logically uh, connect and derive understanding. Oftentimes thinking just happens automatically. We are not necessarily, when we are about to cross the road, we are not involved in a lot of thinking as such. We look around, and then we cross the road as we see that there are not many vehicles around. But behind that, the thinking of, okay, if I cross the road when there is a vehicle coming, that is going to hit me, I'm going to get hurt, and all that thinking is going on behind the mind. But we are largely doing uh, it without even our conscious effort. As such, it becomes it is part of us. But there are times when we have to consciously think. It may be about how to solve a problem or making a decision. Thinking enables us to connect and integrate new experiences into our existing understanding and perception of how things are, uh, especially when we are to deal with challenges, when we are to deal with new situations. Thinking has to be done consciously, and we start doing it consciously as such. Okay, moving on. So we talked about what is thinking. We said thinking is a reflective process, right? A representative process, or which involves organizing, analyzing, patternizing, imagining, reorganizing, and creating as such. Okay, moving on. Let us look at. We also looked at this aspect of the left brain, right brain. You also probably would have read the articles and looked at watched the videos that are there on your Moodle, on your learning page as such. So, as we said, according to the studies, left brain is more to do with the logic part of it, and the right brain to do with creative part of it. But we also mentioned and emphasized this fact that without the help of one, without the left and the right, it will be difficult for us to make sense of things and make proper thinking take place. So we need to employ both sides of the brain. And so we said the left brain largely concentrates on languages, numbers, analytical thinking, all to do with symbols. However, the creative side of the brain, which is the right side of the brain, is more looking at how to be creative, how to be imaginative, how to be intuitive, how to be colorful, looking at emotions and all that, music, expression of emotions, all that is part of the right brain. And it is only in the coming together of the left and the right brain where we have a proper understanding of many things, and as it is also then uh, the ability for us to connect things logically, to bring things, not just think about it, but also express about it, can take place. We also talked about the person who was involved in in the study of the right brain left brain relationship. And in fact, out of his studies came the theory of right brain left brain. Roger W. Sperry, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1981. He was awarded basically the Nobel Prize for the study in the effects of epilepsy. But it was as part of his study of how to treat epilepsy that he happened to discover what happens when how is brain divided into two hemisphere, and how corpus callosum brings it together. And when in the absence of a connecting factor, things doesn't make sense. People find it difficult to make sense of things and information as such. So generally speaking, the left side of the brain tends to control many aspects of language and logic, while the right side tends to handle spatial information and visual comprehension. So, and there are many studies conducted to prove how it is required. It is a myth in that sense that people are only left brained or right brained, because without the presence of both, life is not uh, easy or sensible as such. So, one of the experiments was conducted in the University of Utah. Utah. Around 1,000 participants were involved in the study, where they looked at how a person use, what preference a person has in using what side of the brain as such. So the result emerged out of the study, that it's absolutely true that some brain function occurs in one or the other side of the brain. Language tends to be on the left, attention more on the right, but people don't tend to have a stronger left or right-sided brain network. It seems to be determined more connection by connection, says Dr. Jeff Anderson, who was the lead in this study in the University of Utah. So people, it is, if we have been thinking, if we have been hearing that, oh, a person is left brained or right brained, it is a myth. That is what we need to remember when we start about thinking. So if you are saying I'm only an analytical thinker, well, that is wrong. You are not. You do probably depend on a lot of analysis or analytical method of thinking, but that does not mean your creative side is not functional. It is in fact through, if you think analytical, and for your expression you will have to use, or you will be using your creative thinking to express your emotions and your findings and stuff. Good. I think that's where we stopped last week. And so let us move into looking at the modes of thinking. And so if thinking is a process, and we said what process it is. We said it is a representative process. And if thinking is a representative process of symbols, and we have to organize, we have to analyze, we have to patternize and imagine and reorganize and create, we also need to understand there are modes of thinking. Okay, and that's what we are going to talk now. What are the modes of thinking? So we will look at two personalities, and to understand the various modes of thinking as such. So the first personality that we are going to talk about is Joy Paul Guilford, or J.P. Guilford. He's one of the founders of the psychology of creativity. And Joy Paul Guilford was born in the year 1897 in Nebraska, USA, and he lived to the age of 90. And he was one of the scientists, psychologists, who was instrumental in developing the field of psychology of creativity. Now, as a psychologist, his specialty, of course, again was applied psychology. He is the author of a three-dimensional model of the intelligence and the concept of divergent thinking. He applied psychology, psychometrics, uh, and one of the founders of the psychology of creativity, as I already mentioned. He has many contributions to his laurel, uh, and but one of the major thing that he has been involved is with structure of intelligence, or the three-dimensional model um, of the intelligence as such. So, according to the three-dimensional model of intelligence, um, intellect may be represented by three aspects: the operational aspect, which is basically cognitive memory, cognition, memory, divergent production, convergent production, evaluation. Secondly, uh, about it is about products, and thirdly about content. So under products we talk about units, classes, relations, systems, transformation, and implication. And then the content part is visual, auditory, symbolic, semantic, behavioral. That so it is he resembled it as a cube with three dimension, and that yields a total of 180 possible unique abilities, which are correlated with each other. So a beautiful study in the area of intelligence, the structure of the intelligence as such. So the three aspects of the three-dimensional in the three-dimensional theoretical model of the structure is the product, then we have the content and the operation, three part of it. Secondly, creativity. Guilford, in his 1950 American Psychological Association presidential address, emphasized the central significance of creative talent for industry, science, arts, and education, and the need for more research into the nature of creativity. He developed a theory of creativity in which he described creativity as sensitivity to problems. Okay, creativity is equal to sensitivity to problems, as divergent thinking and ability to generate multiple ideas, and creation of new patterns, or transformation of knowledge and meaning, or use of the function of objects in a new way. Now that led him to talk more on the area of divergent thinking, and that's the mode that we are going to discuss more on this side. So what is divergent thinking? Guilford first proposed the concept of divergent thinking in the 1950s and later introduced its developed model as the main ingredient of creativity in 1976. Thus, he associated divergent thinking with creativity, appointing it several characteristics. So, one of the several characteristics, the four that we will talk about is fluency, the ability to produce great number of ideas or problem solution. Secondly, flexibility, the ability to simultaneously propose a variety of approach to a specific problem. Thirdly, originality, the ability to produce new original ideas. Fourthly, elaboration, the ability to systematize and organize the details of an idea in head and carry it out. He also emphasized the distinction between convergent and divergent thinking. That's the most important thing that we have to learn from Joy Paul Guilford, as he talks about divergent thinking. So in when we are talking about intelligence, when we are talking about thinking, what we are talking is about thinking that is thinking which could be done in different ways, or there are different modes to thinking, and one of it is divergent mode or divergent thinking. And Joy Paul Guilford is one of those propounders. Not that this was not existent till 1950s, but that this was made all the more emphatical in the way people think uh, after Guilford's work as such. So, what then is divergent? What then is convergent thinking. In order to understand divergent thinking, it is important for us to understand the convergent thinking first, because Guilford starts making this very clearly, making this distinction very clearly about convergent and divergent thinking. So in order to look at divergent, we will look at convergent first. So what is convergent? Convergent thinking is the process of figuring out a concrete solution to any problem that is given. The process is straightforward and focus on pinpointing a single most effective answer to a problem. Figuring out the solution to a problem is its only goal and emphasizes on speed, accuracy, and logic. So, in the divergent thinking, what we are looking at is the solution to begin with. And how do we arrive at solution? By walking ourselves through established methods and techniques, because that means speed and accuracy, because it's already established. And this form of thinking is usually linear in its nature. um, it is one from one step to the next step to the next step to the next step till you arrive at a final solution as such. So convergent thinking doesn't always involve seeking out new procedure to solve the problem. Rather, it focuses on finding the best solution for a problem by hook or crook through the established methods and technique. Methods involved in convergent thinking also involves recognizing the previously tried out techniques and reapplying them along with readily stored information. This method of checking out the archives is most effective when the situation is pre-existent and the solution only needs to be worked out through decision making strategies. So uh, you know this emphasizes the fact of that you can achieve a solution for sure, and that solution is something that is already the norm, or it is already the practice. The problem has already occurred in the past. This was the way it was solved, and so we can solve it now, the same problem, through the same method. That's the idea behind that. Convergent thinking is a tool also used in creative problem solving. The process is linked to knowledge as manipulation of existing knowledge through various standard procedure in what leads to formation of solutions. So to say that we are doing convergent thinking is not bad, because it does give us the option to think through the existing processes or through the existing work of the experts who have gone before us and have worked on some of the solution. And thus it is also creative in the on the other hand, in the way that it approaches the problem and manipulates the knowledge base and uses the established norms to arrive at solution as such. Now, the disadvantage of convergent thinking is the answer procured by by this mode of thinking is either completely right or 100% wrong. There cannot be a middle path, because it has to be either right or wrong, because it's already established thing. So, which may not be the best possibility all the time. Uh, for example, um, either a person is sick or a person is healthy. uh, so it doesn't give the room for to say, okay, this person probably is uh, is sick, uh, or is on his way to fall sick because of these other possibilities. It doesn't look at the possibilities. It looks at what is and what is not. That's all. So it is pretty much black and white. It is pretty much either this side or that side. It cannot have a middle ground, or it cannot have a ground of possibilities as such. That's a major disadvantage between of convergent thinking as such. Now, convergent thinking is also has a relationship with divergent thinking, in that it takes place in a free-flowing manner and is spontaneous, which results in multiple possible solution in short amount of time. Because of the established pattern, we could take the same route, and so it is there is a free-flowing, and then there is the time involved in arriving at solution is very less. The procedure is or This procedure is unorganized and yields unexpected connection. The information and ideas obtained as a result of divergent thinking can be structured using convergent thinking to produce a single most effective answer. So, in terms of divergent thinking, there are many possibilities that arrive. There are many possibilities, many solutions that just comes up, but you need convergent thinking to streamline those possibilities and those solutions. So for example, processes like brainstorming, creative thinking, and free writing, they're part of divergent thinking, applied at the beginning of a problem solving process. Various solutions produced by the divergent method can be used to sort out the best possible answers thereafter. Most popular techniques used in convergent thinking are knowledge probabilities, logic, decision making, strategies, and answers evaluated from multiple techniques. Like, for example, we have in terms of how does it affect us as students is one of the things that you look at in your exam sheets is you might have a multiple choice question answer. A multiple choice question answer has only one answer that is right. That's a convergent way of thinking. So you have to think convergently to answer that question. You cannot think multiple possibilities and check multiple answers. Then you will be completely wrong. So those the tests, variety of tests, such like that, standardized tests, quizzes, spelling tests, and similar other tests, memory verses, all are basically something that evolves out of convergent thinking. Um, And so the advantage of convergent thinking then is to find out the best possible answer to any problem without leaving any room for ambiguity, which is very important in when it is to do prescriptive way of doing anything. Say, for example, your doctor, when you go to a doctor with some kind of sickness, your doctor cannot say, oh, okay, I will try out this medicine, probably this is the sickness. If that is the case, you probably will have difficulty to live a healthy life. The doctor should be able to think convergently, of course, think divergently to begin with, and then should be able to make his decision based on his convergent thinking. Now, that's something that we should remember. Same way, when people come to us as pastors, as ministers, as leaders, or when we have to make decision in our writing, should I choose from this various positions that many people are taking, which one should I opt for? You should be able to think divergent to begin with, saying, okay, there are many of these possibilities, but what fits into my situation? What fits into my culture? What fits into my context? What exactly is that is relevant to me? You should be able to think divergently, and then to say, okay, I'm going with this because of these reason, and because this is the most prescriptive or the most relevant thing in my context as such. So the solution arriving, or the solution prescription, is more convergent, but the exploration of a problem is more divergent in its aspect. So let us look at divergent a little better way, in a little better manner. So what is divergent thinking? Divergent thinking is the process of thinking that explores multiple possible solutions in order to generate creative idea. So it is not about, if you look at convergent thinking, it is about the solution. Look at this. And it is almost an inward movement. It is towards the problem, and you are just concentrating on one solution of it. But in terms of divergent, it is about solutions. It is about solutions, and all in all possible direction, and it is non-linear in its emphasis as such. So that is where we see the difference between the divergent thinking and the convergent thinking. The process of divergent thinking, the thought process is not as straightforward as convergent thinking, but used in conjunction with convergent thinking. The term divergent refers to developing in different directions. So, divergent thinking refers to opening the mind in various different directions and trying out multiple solutions for a problem. The characteristic of divergent thinking includes spontaneity, free flowing, non linear, unlike convergent thinking, which is more established, more linear, and more structured in its format. So, divergent thinking, we should understand, generates its name from the idea that there are limitless number of solutions for any given problem. There's not just one solution all the time. Most of the time, there are multiple ways of addressing the same issue. And that's where the divergent thinking becomes more important. It is also an essential aspect of creative thinking. Like convergent thinking, it is also an essential aspect of creative thinking. You do not simply land on the best possible solution out of chance or key or luck every time. Creative process involves plucking out varieties of potential results, leading to formation of new ideas, and the best solution is chosen then, after which can be deemed as the result of creativity. It's very important for us to recognize that for creativity to emerge, for creative thinking to take place, divergence is critical. Divergent thinking is critical. So, what are the advantages of divergent thinking? Divergent thinking doesn't always see the world as black and white, but there is more to it. Not every question has to be answered in yes and no, right? There has to be open-ended questions too. So a divergent thinker is broad-minded and isn't focused on finding the absolute answer every time, but rather he or she is more focused on keeping the options open, not being linear towards finding a solution the lead to uh, higher creativity as such. So, not being linear towards finding a solutions lead to, but looking at finding more solutions to a particular problem as such. Now, the disadvantage of divergent thinking isn't always able to pinpoint the exact answer that is required or the right answer. For instance, in a standardized aptitude test, a convergent thinker might be able to decide the right answer, but the contemplating mind of a divergent thinker might work against him in that situation, meaning he'll be like, okay, this also is a possibility, that also is a possibility, and so he looks at all the different possibilities and then gets confused in his mind and unable to, or finds it hard to pinpoint at the best solution as such. Excuse me, please. A relation to convergent thinking in of divergent thinking is it takes place in a free flowing manner and is spontaneous, which results in multiple possible solution in short amount of time. This procedure is unorganized and yields unexpected connection. The information and ideas obtained as a result of divergent thinking can be structured using convergent thinking, as we mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's about divergent and convergent thinking. So then what are we talking? We are talking that divergent thinking is an outward movement. How is it outward? Guilford first proposed the concept of divergent thinking in the 1950s and later introduced its developed model as the main ingredient of creativity. Thus, he associated divergent thinking with creativity appointing its several characteristics. So when we say you have to be creative, so Guilford says, you know, divergent thinking is the key ingredient to creativity. And he lists out the four characteristics of creative thinking. One is fluency, the other being flexibility, third being originality, and fourth being elaboration. Now, what is fluency? Fluency is the ability to produce great number of ideas or problem solution. Then what is flexibility? Flexibility is the ability to simultaneously propose a variety of approach to a specific problem. Um, if the first one is about the solution, the second one is about the approaches or processes at times. And then the third one is originality. What do we mean by originality? The originality, Guilford, as he says, is the ability to produce new, original ideas. So, moving away from what is established, like in Convergent, where they always use the treaded path or most used path. In the divergent thinking, originality is to produce new or original ideas, newer methods. And you might already might be thinking, okay, so then all the scientific discovery is a product of divergent thinking and not necessarily convergent thinking, or the divergence that happens in convergent thinking as such. The fourth thing was elaboration. Elaboration is the ability to systematize and organize the details of an idea in our heads and carry it out. And so it is important for us to see how um, creative thinking requires us to be fluent, flexible, original, and elaborate, and which is a result of divergent thinking. Now, in our papers, when you are writing your papers, when you are writing your essays or your research paper, remember we are not interested in copying pasting. If that was the case, then you wouldn't have to do an you would be at the bachelor's level largely, where you are just collecting information, gathering knowledge. But you are at the master's level. It is important that you are able to look into anything more critically and more creatively. And so when you are writing an essay or when you are writing a research paper, it is primary and important for you to already look into the various suggestions of the other authors or experts in the field, and creatively and critically analyze it and come up with the original idea or an original understanding of your own and elaborated in clear terms. So it's important that uh, we do divergent thinking in our papers, and that's why we are emphasizing on this fact. So we looked at, in terms of the modes of thinking, we looked at convergent thinking, divergent thinking, as Guilford offers it to us. And now we are going to look at another personality. And this might be a person whom you might have already heard about in your own um, professional development programs, or when you were studying. A person who is widely accepted as the pioneer of brain training. Okay, his name is Edward de Bono. Edward de Bono invented this world famous technique of thinking called lateral thinking. He is a proponent of the direct teaching of thinking as a skill. Everybody else talks about thinking as one of the aspects, but he is somebody who took thinking as one of those core thing to study and learn and be developed as such. So he has dedicated his life to help people from around the world improve their thinking abilities and creativity skills. His course, such as Six Thinking Hats Method and Thinking Tools, have been used by top corporations, governments, and world leaders. Uh, but his tools also are not just only at the higher level, but are even employed by the school children. His methodology have been proven to help people of all thinking levels to make smarter decisions, faster decisions. So we will look at what Edward de Bono has to offer to us. So Edward de Bono in 1967, um, he invented this term or came up with this term called lateral thinking, basically to differentiate between artistic creativity and idea creativity. We all know artistic creativity is very different from, or their thinking is very different from how we think process, or how we think in other formats of learning of science and things like that. But even there is a difference. It's not just the artist who think laterally. There is a difference between the way creatively the artists think and others ideate. The term was invented as an alternative to step by step thinking, so called vertical thinking, which is justified with sequential, step based on logic. Now, that is the distinctions that he was also to bring. Lateral thinking can be used for generation of new ideas and problems solving, as it by definition leaves the already used behind and looks for completely new option. This type of thinking is based on avoiding the intrinsic limitations in the brain, which rapidly sees pattern and handles information in a distinctive way, where long thought sequences are not broken up once formed. So our brain, as we already said, the the paths that have been plowed, or the way we have been thinking, the brain normally will try to find a pattern within that paths, or within that way of our thinking. But lateral thinking is a break from that. Lateral thinking tools and techniques can be used to restructure and escape such cliched patterns and think outside the box. So that is where we get think outside the box concept, and the words and the phrase comes from lateral thinking as such. Lateral thinking is related to divergent thinking, as discussed in terms of its creativity. Both have the purpose to break out of habitual ways of thinking. Both falls outside the box, but divergent thinking is still sequential in that it follows on an earlier thought, while lateral thinking has no direct connection to an earlier thought. If rational or vertical thinking is described as following the most likely path, divergent thinking is following an extreme path, which lateral thinking is following the least likely path. So, what is lateral thinking? Diagrammatically, lateral thinking is restructuring, finding new ways, problem solving, invention, sorry, invention, and innovation. So the ultimate aim of lateral thinking is invention and innovation. Uh, Moving away from just problem solving. Yes, that happens, but that happens through invention and being innovative. Lateral thinking is solving problems through an indirect and creative approach using reasoning that is not immediately obvious and involving ideas that may not be obtainable by using only traditional step-by-step logic. To understand lateral thinking, it is necessary to compare lateral thinking and critical thinking. Now, critical thinking is primarily concerned with judging the truth value of a statement and seeking errors. On the other hand, lateral thinking is more concerned with the movement value of statements and ideas. A person uses lateral thinking to move from one known idea to creating new idea. So in our paper, most of the time in our essays, what we employ is critical thinking, or which is basically looking at the arguments by various authors and say, hey, how true are this? Does it fit into my situation? Does it actually apply to me? Is it relevant to me? Is it completely true, or is it based on only a certain assumptions and certain biases which does not consider other perspective? But when you are writing a research paper or when you're writing a thesis, what you're doing is you're looking at your work as critical thinker and moving away from that to create new ideas. That is the major difference also between essay and a research paper. In an essay, we are not trying to bring up a new idea. What we are looking at is, from the already established idea, what is it that is most feasible. So we evaluate the ideas and then we arrive at a conclusion. But in a research paper and in terms of a thesis, what we are doing is, we are not just critically doing that part of judging whether it is relevant or not, but we are trying to arrive at a solution to a problem that is very yours, or very much relevant to your people, to your circumstances, by using critical thinking, but moving away from that to create the new knowledge base as such. So that is what we have to understand about lateral thinking. So when we are writing research paper, lateral thinking is a very, very important part of our thinking process. It's not just divergent. Divergent would only mean that we are trying to find solutions outside the box but within the pattern. But lateral thinking would mean go outside of the pattern itself. It's a movement far outside the pattern, and arrive at new ideas. With logic, you start out with certain ingredients, just as in playing chess, you start out with given pieces. But what are those pieces? In most real life situations, the pieces are not given. We just assume that they are there. We assume certain perceptions, certain concepts, and certain boundaries. Lateral thinking is concerned not with playing with existing piece, but with seeking to change those very pieces. Lateral thinking is concerned with perception part of thinking. Remember, it is where it is at the foundation itself. It is not at the effect of it is even at the foundation itself. We look at what are the basic foundational pieces to deal with, and we see, oh, okay, does it have to be like this? Does the solution have to be always like this, as a result of convergent and divergent thinking? uh, is there a way that the ingredient itself could be altered to bring about a new result? A healthy human brain does not want to always be creative. It is designed to figure out how to do things or how to think about things, and then locks that automatic response or behavior into a subconscious process so that your conscious brain can focus on other matters. So you do not decide to breathe. You're already breathing right now. Now, when I'm saying that, you're conscious of, oh, yeah, I'm inhaling and I'm exhaling. Now you're conscious, but you were not conscious all this while, because the brain, it is already moved into the subconscious part of the brain, where it says, yeah, it has to be the breathing process, the inhaling, exhaling, the respiration system needs to be in place, that the work of inhaling, exhaling has to be there already, otherwise this person is going to die. And so it happens automatically, unlike unlike in where we have to we met we looked at a critical situation outside our windows, we saw something, and we have to make a decision whether we need to run for it or do something about it. That is conscious. So your healthy brain gives room for you to make decisions that are immediate at nature. And so lateral thinking requires you to look at the pattern of breathing. Oh, shall I stop breathing now? What happens if I stop breathing now? That's a conscious thing that we have to work at it as such, and that is part of the that what happens if we don't inhale and only exhale? What happens if I only inhale? um, or do I have to inhale and exhale? No, those kind of things. So this is why Dr. Bono developed the lateral thinking technique to help overcome our natural proclivity to get locked into pattern and allow us to be creative on demand. These techniques can be used by individuals and groups. So what are the lateral thinking techniques? The lateral thinking is a set of process that provides a deliberate, systematic way of thinking creatively that results in innovative thinking in a repeatable manner. While critical thinking is primarily concerned with judging the true value of statement and seeking errors, lateral thinking is more concerned with the movement value of statements and ideas, as we mentioned earlier. A person uses lateral thinking to move from one known idea to creative new ideas. So, um, Dr. Bono defines four main categories of lateral thinking tools. One, idea generating tools. Second, which breaks free from your current thinking patterns from their usual pathway. Second, focus tools that open your mind to new possibilities in the search of new ideas. Third, harvest tools that help maximize value that is received from the idea generating output. Fourth, treatment tools that ground the creativity process by making the wild ideas and make them fit the real world constraints, resources, and support. Often trying to think harder in the same direction may not be as useful as changing direction. Effort in the same direction will not necessarily help you achieve your goal. Lateral thinking deliberately distances itself from vertical or logical thinking, which are the classical methods of problem solving, working out the solution, and things like that, or even horizontal imagination, having many ideas like the divergent thinking, but being concerned with the detailed implementation of them by differing the judgment itself. So that's pretty much what we have to understand about lateral thinking and uh, convergent thinking and divergent thinking. So uh, it boils down to something like this: analytical, which is the left brain, creative, which is the right brain. Now, what forms of thinking falls under analytical and creative? Obviously, we know convergent thinking falls under analytical, lateral and divergent thinking under creative. Inward thinking is more analytical, outward thinking is more creative. Uh, Analytical, of course, has to do with analytics. Creative has to do with generative. Analytical thinking uses probabilities, while creative thinking looks at possibilities. Logical is more analytical brain, rational is more analytical brain, focused, objective, single answer, and it's a left brain thing. However, in terms of creative thinking, it is more imaginative, intuitive, emotive, and diffuses. It's more subjective. It is to do with answers and not just with single answer, and it's more of a right brain uh, work as such. But look at this: can a man exist with only one hemisphere of brain? Probably yes, but for sensibility and for being uh, uh, for being more um, clear about things, you need to have the operation of both lateral and divergent and convergent, and both part of analytical and creative side of our thinking as such. So people, let us remember this, um, that thinking is important. We think convergently, divergently and laterally. Not one is better than the other. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is convergent and divergent are important, and it has its own function. Each thinking has its own function. Without one thinking or one form of thinking, it probably will not be balanced. We need to have a balance, and we need to be able to use each one of these thinking in the right way. So when you are initially studying any course, you will employ your convergent form of thinking, because you are learning these things new, but learning from people who have already gone far ahead in that direction and have made the writings possible, made the thinking possible. So you think along with the thinkers. That is convergent. Divergent, on the other hand, is when you start writing your responses, your reflections on that thinking. And lateral is when you start working on a particular topic and say, hi, I know that these are the thinkings available. Yes. Now, these are the critical way, these are the judgments that are there on that. But then now I need to arrive at, I need to be able to give more valuable or more valid solutions, or I need to bring about that understanding that people require, so that they will be more effective in how they treat a challenge. So that is lateral, and that is more in the area of our research and thesis writings. We will look into a few more aspect of the same, and then we will look at critical thinking, creative thinking a little bit more, and then we will look at the opposing types, and then we will start then we will stop at critical thinking for the session, and then I will give you two work that you have to do, and then after that, tomorrow's session, we will look into the aspect of critical thinking, which will lead us to our paper writing as such. So we will look into reflectively some of these things. Okay, moving on. So what we were talking all this while is the modes of thinking. And so we spoke about the three modes of thinking: convergent, divergent, and lateral thinking. So once again, to say, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is convergent plus divergent. That is critical thinking. So what is lateral thinking or creative thinking? Creative thinking is linear, convergent, and divergent. Convergent, divergent, and linear produces creative thinking. You have to, it is a combination of all the three different modes of thinking as such. Linear is more convergent. Um, Actually, sorry, the word is lateral over there. So it's not linear. So convergent, divergent, and lateral is what results in creative thinking as such. So excuse me once again for the word that is written as linear. It is not linear, it is more lateral. I'm not good with this pen, so excuse me for that. It is lateral and not linear. So thank you for uh, excuse. I will change that slide for you, for us to look into it later. Okay, so to say, uh, thinking is basically bringing facts and data together from various sources and then applying logic and knowledge to solve problems or to make informed decision. That's thinking. What is divergent thinking? Divergent thinking is breaking a topic apart to explore its various components and then generating ideas, new ideas, and solution. What is critical thinking? Critical thinking is analysis and evaluation of information, beliefs, or knowledge. And So what is then creative thinking? Creative thinking is generation of new ideas, breaking from established thought, theories, rules, and procedures. I hope you would uh, take note of that as such. Okay, moving on, we will look at opposing types of thinking. Now, when we say opposing types, we are not saying that it is one is better than the other, but what we are saying is uh, that these are the pulls. This is how the thinking, various thinking pulls in different directions as such. So the first being creative and the other being analytical. Now, the creative thinking pulls you towards more, the aspect of right brain, and the analytical more towards your left brain as such. And what is our, each one of us have a preferred way of thinking. So you should remember where our pull is going to be. Secondly, the creative brain is more abstract, divergent, and holistic, whereas the analytical brain is more concrete, convergent, and sequential. Uh, this is very important for us to know. So this is creative side, the abstract. This is the creative side. Divergent is creative side, holistic is creative side, concrete, convergent, and sequential is analytical side. It is important for us to recognize that. Not that alone. So we will see that the reasonings, there are types of reasoning that is involved in both types of thinking. So the creative thinking involves more of inductive reasoning, meaning going from the specific to larger, newer principles and ideas. And analytical is more deductive, meaning looking at the big problem and trying to arrive at a solution by dividing it, by dividing it into parts and into into segregate into segments and sections, and then basically dissect it and to see where exactly and how exactly the solution could be approached. Now, an interesting thing for you to see. Are you able to see this? Give a good look at it. If it is not clear on the video, to look at, say, what is the person saying. It says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb the tree. Please climb the tree. Okay, I'm hoping that you had a good understanding of thinking. I want you to write a reflection, um, you know, on your thought on this picture or on this cartoon that is in front of you, and on the statement that the man is making about examination. So, thank you for your patient listening, and I'm hoping that you have made notes of the video and also of what I've instructed within in there, so that you will have some notes to refer to when you go back and start working on your writings as such. So the first part of your writing today, you're going to write around not more than 300 words and submit on the forum that is going to be there on this statement. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Make a reflection in the light of the thinking and the modes of thinking that you learned about today. Thank you. May God bless you. I'll look forward for your submissions. Thank you.